Our next lecture will focus on, as the title says, the influence of Egypt on the Torah. This is a very broad subject, but it's obvious that if a people such as the Hebrews lived for several centuries in Egypt, there are certain things about Egypt that influenced and shaped the Hebrews. After a while, you will find you start using English words, American practices, even though you still eat molokhia. You still retain things from your old culture, while at the same time accepting things from your new culture. So, I have said before that we do not have evidence for the Hebrews in Egypt from an archaeological standpoint. But we have a lot of evidence of Egypt in the Hebrew Bible. In other words, Egypt has left its mark in the Bible and on the Israelites. And so I'd like to look at some of that. We mentioned earlier today the reference in Numbers chapter 22 about how the Israelites came to the land of Moab after they left Sinai. And this was the king of Moab, Balak, was very worried about these people. And it's interesting that he describes them as a people has come out of Egypt. A people has come out of Egypt. He doesn't call them Hebrews, doesn't call them Israelites, but a people come out of Egypt. So I think it's a very interesting line. What is it about them that made it look like they came out of Egypt? So, since the Hebrews lived for several centuries, it stands to reason that there will be various aspects of Egyptian language, culture, religion, and so on that will influence the Hebrews and therefore will be visible in the Bible. There are some things, of course, that the Israelites picked up in Egypt which are a problem. So, for instance, the golden calf in Exodus chapter 32 was probably something that influenced from Egypt, which we'll talk about in a moment. And such a thing would be offensive. On the other hand, there are other things that would be considered rather neutral. For instance, the cherubim. When God tells Moses to make the cherubim in connection with the Ark of the Covenant, he doesn't tell them what it looks like. So for Moses, or for Bezalel, the craftsman who made the Ark of the Covenant, if he has the instruction from God, make a cherubim, what is it going to look like? Maybe it'll look Egyptian. Now, one of the first indicators that the Israelites had been in Egypt is to look at the number of the Israelites during the Exodus period and following periods that actually have Egyptian names. All the names that you see on here are either Egyptian or are thought to be Egyptian names. Some are debated. Now, all the names with a star beside it, Miriam, Phineas, Moses, Putiel, all the ones with a star are from the tribe of Levi. It's very interesting. Why did so many Levites have Egyptian names? All the names with red line under is the name of the god Horus. Hor, Hori, Har Nefer means Har is beautiful. Pashhor, this is a later priest from the days of Jeremiah, but Pashhor is again Hor. So why is the name Horus so frequently used amongst the Exodus generation. If you remember that the Sharqiya province, the biblical land of Goshen, that the god who is most important in this area was the god Horus. The road to leave Egypt to Sinai is Tariq Horus, the way of Horus. The name of the lake, when you reach this, was Shihor, the waters of Horus. So it's clear that the god Horus was the most influential god in the area where the Israelites were living. So does it surprise you that this name pops up in the text? It makes sense. The other thing we have to bear in mind is how much time had passed between God's relationship with Abraham. Centuries had passed till we get to Moses. How much of the revelation of God to the revelation of God to Abraham did the people of Moses' day know about God? They had no Torah. They had no written scriptures. Not until Moses do we have this. So for hundreds of years, what was their religion like? We don't know. But I think it's quite clear that whatever memory they had of the religion of Abraham had become mixed with Egyptian religion. Again, after hundreds of years, that's to be expected. They don't have a Bible, they don't have a Torah to guide them. Okay. All right. So, again, we see also the names of Miriam, Moses, and Aaron are all thought to be Egyptian, but Moses and Aaron's name are still debated, but Miriam definitely is an Egyptian name from the word Mari, which means to love, beloved, a loved one, and so on. Okay. Now, there's something interesting. I mentioned this yesterday, and that is that there was no week in Egypt. There was no 7-day week. There was rather a 10-day work cycle, followed by another 10 and another 10, and no Agaza except for religious holidays. So, this is what we were talking about yesterday. 3 10-day work cycles with periodic religious holidays. So, as soon as the Israelites leave Egypt, the first commandment God gave them when they left Egypt in chapter 16. Remember, chapter 14, 15, they go through the sea. Chapter 15, they praise God with the song. Chapter 16, Moses gives them instructions about the Sabbath and not working on the Sabbath, that God would provide manna for 6 days, on the 7th day no manna, etc. So before God gave the commandment to keep the Sabbath day holy in the 10 Commandments, He was already giving them the Sabbath commandment as soon as they left Egypt, because once they left Egypt, they could learn once again the design that God gave from creation, to work 6 days and to rest on the 7th. Now, the golden calf I mentioned earlier, why a golden calf? Why did Aaron make a golden calf? There are many different Egyptian gods and goddesses associated with cows and bulls. Of course, Hathor, the most famous in Egypt, but this probably is not what was the golden calf that Aaron made. We have other young bulls, 2 different worship centers. One is the Apis bull from Memphis, and if you go to Saqqara today, you can see the burial place of the bulls, the Serapeum. And the other bull here is a bull that was with Heliopolis, or the temple associated with the sun god Ra. So there were a number of bull cults, bull worship sites in Egypt, and I think probably one of these would be the inspiration for Aaron. Now that may sound hard to believe, but remember, here's Ramses II also making an offering, burning incense to one of the bull cults. Now, I will show you the verse in a minute, but just remember Joseph's father-in-law, remember he married an Egyptian woman, and her father was the priest of Heliopolis. So Joseph's father-in-law was a priest of the sun god Re. So the idea of the sun worship and this particular bull cult may well have been understood by the descendants of Joseph from the priest that had been in their family. We have one of the more interesting stories in the Torah about Korah in Numbers chapter 16. Korah is introduced as a descendant of Kohath, a son of Levi, which means he is the cousin of Moses. The cousin of Moses. And these are a group of people who came to complain against Moses and to complain against Aaron. Datan and Abiram were sons of Eliab, and On, son of Pelet. They became insolent, causing trouble, and they rose up against Moses, and with them 250 Israelite men, leaders in the community. And they came to oppose Moses and Aaron and said, "You have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" Here we have the leader of this group is named Korah, and he is complaining because God has made Aaron the high priest, Baba Kabir. Aaron. Korah is very upset. Why is he upset? The name Korah comes from the Hebrew word korach, which means shaved head. Shaved head or bald head. Korah was a Levite. So he was from the same priestly family as Aaron. And the question is, could he have already been a priest in Egypt? One of the others involved in this attack on Moses and Aaron was a man named On. On, the son of Pelet. And On is the Egyptian name for the sun cult center in Heliopolis. On, in Hebrew, is Heliopolis in Greek, city of the sun. So, who is this man On? Did he have a connection to the priests of Heliopolis? And then we remember that Joseph is the daughter of Potiphar Ra, and notice the end of his name, Ra, the sun god, the priest of On. So we find already that the Hebrews were intermarrying with Egyptians who had connections to the sun worship at Heliopolis. Now, Egyptian priests typically shaved their heads. Here's one priest from the time of Akhenaten, named an Egyptian Panechesi. Panechesi is where we get the name Phineas. Phineas in Arabic? Pinhas. Pinhas is this Egyptian name. And Pinhas is the son of Aaron. So he was a priest. So here is another priest named Pinhas with a shaved head. Now remember, the Bible specifically talks about Aaron having longer hair and having a beard. So apparently, God is introducing a new kind of priesthood to be different than the Egyptian kind of priests. So it seems that Korah and his friends are saying, hey, we had priestly authority before, and now you're taking it away from us. And they want to still be priests. But God's saying, no, there's a new order. Nizam Gadid. And you look everywhere on the Egyptian monuments, and you'll see the priests with their shaved heads. So this is from Karnak Temple, and you see the priests with their white linen garments and their shaved heads, carrying the sacred boat from Karnak Temple. Here's another priest named Amenhotep from the days of Ramses IX. Again, you see his head shaved. Very often, when the priests were not doing their duties in the temple, they would wear a wig. So in other scenes, you see the same priest has long hair. It's the same guy, takes off the wig to do his temple work. So, my question is, had Korah and his colleagues been priests in Egypt, and they were challenging Aaron because they wanted to continue to be priests? Look at verse 16. This is still Numbers 16, verse 16. Moses said to Korah, "You and all your followers are to appear before the Lord tomorrow, you and they and Aaron. Each man is to take his censer," that is the special dish for burning incense, "and put incense in it. 250 censers in all, and present it before the Lord." Now this proves that they were priests because they had the special incense burners like the priests. So it's clear these men were priests, but the shaved heads is the clue that they were Egyptian priests. And God was introducing a new system with Aaron and his sons not to be like Egyptian priests. So you see I have a beard, so I'm cool. All right. In Numbers 6, 16, 17, 18, these verses where Moses tells them to bring the plates for their incense, the Hebrew word that's used is machata. Machta in Hebrew is the censer for burning the incense. And here you can see Thutmose IV, and he's holding a bowl burning incense, and the hieroglyphs read Irit Chet, making a fire offering. This is the same root here, Chet. So machta is a fire offering or burning incense. So it's interesting that the actual word used in Hebrew here in Numbers 16 by these Egyptian bald-headed priests is an Egyptian word for the incense burner. So it shows, again, they were bringing with them the Egyptian traditions. Another wonderful picture from Luxor Temple. And again, you can see the priests with their shaved heads. And I draw your attention to the priest in the front who is holding in his hand a stick with a hand on the front of it. And in the cup in the hand is burning incense. You can see the smoke going out of his hand up towards the figure of the god. And by the way, notice this. Inside the boat is a shrine covered with linen, and this has the image of the god Amun. So when they take it out on a procession, much like the Levites would carry the Ark of the Covenant in procession, we're told that they have a linen cloth to cover the Ark of the Covenant. So too here, when the image of the god is taken out, it's covered with a linen cloth. That's why you can't see the image. Same practice. Now, just a little closer look. Here is one of these incense burners. It's on the end of a hand. So you have a hand. I'll show you a little close-up. There, you can see the fingers, you can see the hand. Okay? Now, back up to here. The Hebrew word here is kaf zahav, dahab. Okay? Kaf, the hand. Okay? Yeah. So it's translated to burn incense, but kaf zahab is a hand that's burning incense. And this is exactly what you're doing here. So, yeah, so Exodus 25:29 and Numbers 7 mentions this kaf zahav, or a kaf of gold. So something like this that the Egyptian priests were using is also being used to burn incense in the tabernacle. Okay. Now, I showed you this picture earlier. This is actually a model to the exact scale of the tabernacle in Timnah, Israel, southern Israel, and you can visit it. But the idea of a tent shrine or a temple that you could make as a tent and move it around is something the Egyptians themselves had perfected for years. So for instance, here is a scene, a drawing from a tomb in the Said, 2,400 years ago, BC, I'm sorry. And you can see the structure is made with poles. And this was where the body of the dead was taken for purification and mummification. And it was called the purification tent. So the idea, the technology to make such tents for religious purposes, of course, was known thousands of years before in Egypt. And even the tent of the Pharaoh in a military campaign, you can see on a number of places, Ramses II engaged in battles against the Hittites in what is today Syria. And here on the front of Luxor Temple, you have the tent of the king in the middle, surrounded by shields, protective shields that made a wall around the camp. And this is very similar to the description of the tabernacle that had a wall, and inside of it was the tent of meeting. And that the picture is very, very similar. Here is a drawing of the same scene. This scene is found in 3 or 4 different temples. The first one is Luxor Temple. This one is found in the Ramesseum, on the funeral temple of Ramses, and also I'll show you from Abu Simbel also. So once again, you can see the tent in the middle and the shields that are standing up and locking together to make a wall around it. So the design of the king's camp is very much like the tabernacle and the tent of meeting, because God, the King of Israel, has his camp, and he's marching through the desert as if going to war, much like the Egyptian Pharaoh. Now, at Abu Simbel, inside the temple, there is carvings on the wall, and I'll just show you a close-up of the king's tent. And here's the king's tent, and in the middle, you have the cartouche of the king, Ramses II. And surrounding it are 2 falcons, and their wings, like the cherubim, surround the holy name of the king. So the symbolism of the wings as protection of the holy presence, you can see this. So the name, of course, is what represents the king. And remember, again and again in the Bible, it refers to God having a place for his name to dwell. God will not physically be in the temple, but his name will dwell in the temple, or his glory will dwell in the temple. Now notice, outside of this Holy of Holies, if you will, look, you have different foreign people, Nubians, Asians, bowing down to worship. So the picture is a good illustration, I think, of the tabernacle, the idea of the cherubim and so on. Again, this is a very common picture you will see in temples all over Egypt, where you have the name of the pharaoh and then the wings of the falcon or a different bird to symbolize protection of the holy name. I mentioned earlier the Acacia Tree in the Sinai. The Hebrew word is shittah, and shittim is the plural. And interestingly, the word derives from the Egyptian word shenej. So the actual Hebrew word is the Egyptian word. So the tree, of course, is a very important tree in Sinai and also in parts of Israel as well, and Jordan. So God instructed Moses to use this wood, and it was to be covered over with gold. You only need to walk through the Cairo Museum to know that the ancient Egyptians were experts on taking things made of wood and covering it with very fine gold. What's interesting is that the word that's used to describe the technical process of covering wood with gold is the Egyptian word pecha, and the word in Hebrew is pachi. And this is the word that's used in Exodus 39 and Numbers 16. So the altar of incense was to be covered with gold. And so, again, the Hebrew word derives from the Egyptian word. And the reason, I think, is because the Egyptians were experts in this technology. So when you take the technology, you take the language. Okay? You all are Egyptians, but you use a computer, right? And much of the language of computer from English comes into Arabic. If you borrow the technology of carpentry and gold working from the Egyptians, the language will come with it. Same idea. Of course, here's an example, the shrine of Tutankhamun, or even a statue, a goddess, Selket, again from the tomb of Tutankhamun. This was the finest examples of Egyptian gold covering wood. So no doubt some of the same technology was used to make the Ark of the Covenant, the tabernacle, different elements in the tent of meeting. This, of course, is one suggested reproduction of the Ark of the Covenant. I was a consultant for this for the ESV Study Bible, the English Standard Version Study Bible. And I argued with the publisher I didn't like this because it didn't look Egyptian enough. But in any event, how do you make a cherubim? Cherubim is we have no description for it in the Bible. So what does it look like? It has wings. It sometimes has a human body. It sometimes has an animal body. What is it? Now, in terms of the Ark of the Covenant, it's a small box. This is one of the famous boxes from Tutankhamun. And if you notice, there are handles here. And these handles actually pull out on both ends so that it can be carried. And when you set it down, you can push it back in. There's a recent suggestion that this is the technology behind the Ark of the Covenant, because with the long poles, it wouldn't fit so well into the Holy of Holies. So if you had the poles that pushed back underneath like this, then it could fit into the small Holy of Holies of the tabernacle. So if this suggestion is right, you see the same technology here. On the other hand, you have the shrine of Anubis with poles, but these do not collapse. They stay put. The ultimate example of a cherubim, of course, in Egypt is the Sphinx. The Sphinx is the head of the king, the body of the lion. And we have many pictures of this where the Sphinx is the head of the king, the body of the lion, and here with wings. Again, wings are a very important symbol in Egyptian for protection. Think even how Jesus said, "Oh, Jerusalem, how I wished I would gather you as a hen and put you under my wings, wings to protect. It's a symbol of protection. Again, something not to be read too literally, but as a symbol of protection. Now, here are a sphinx or a cherubim made of ivory, and these are discovered in Samaria, in Israel, and they're discovered in Assyria at Nimrud, one of the royal cities. And if you look at this, you see Egyptian style. You see the Egyptian crown. You see the Egyptian beard of the Pharaoh and so on. So even though these are not in Egypt, these cherubim, these winged protective figures, look very Egyptian, found in Israel, found in Assyria. Both the priest's garments and the tabernacle, the cloth of the tent, is one of the materials used is linen. And the Hebrew word is shesh, and it derives from the Egyptian word shes, which is the Egyptian word for linen. So we read that the cloth of the tabernacle, some of the priest's garments, Exodus 28, and this again is not surprising. They've just come out of Egypt. They're going to have linen from Egypt. What's interesting is when you look at later books of the Bible, and it refers to things made of linen, Ezekiel, Chronicles, Esther, a different word is used. The word is boots. So in the books of Exodus and Genesis, the Egyptian word is used. And that's because in Genesis you're in Egypt with Joseph, and in Exodus you've just left Egypt and you're making the new priest's clothes. So it makes sense they have Egyptian linen, which was the best, like Egyptian cotton today. Later books of the Bible, a different word is used because it's not Egyptian linen, it's local linen. Again, if you want to see linen, this is for the tomb of Sennacherib in western Thebes, western Luxor, and you can see the harvesting of the flax, and from the flax plant is where you get the fibers for making linen. And of course, you always see these beautiful white gowns worn by Egyptians, even Osiris, the goddesses, Isis, Nephthys, always wear beautiful white linen. Now, I've already shown you pictures of priests carrying the boat, and these are all over. Now, this is a very large one. This is the King Seti I. Here are more bald priests. You can see the tops of their heads. Now here we have the boat. This is the edge of the boat, and this is the shrine. And if you look up here, you can see there's a statue, and there is a statue here of the god. This is a ram for Amun, and this is a falcon for Ra. And once again, you see the winged figures protecting the image, much like the tabernacle. There's another interesting Egyptian connection, and this is with the breastplate that the priests would wear. The high priest wore a breastplate, and it was made with different stones, 12 stones. Each stone would carve on it the name of one of the names of the tribes, so that when the priest would go into the temple or into the tabernacle to pray, he was taking the whole nation with him to pray on their behalf. The study of the names of these stones is very interesting. Here's a picture suggesting to someone what this might have looked like. Here's another one. But in any event, you get the idea of this breastplate with 12 gemstones, 3 in each line, and the name of the tribe carved upon it. Now, I'm not interested so much in the camel, but my colleague here, Dr. James Harrell, is a geologist from the University of in Ohio in America. And he has made his career studying geology of Egypt, studying the stones, both the large stones and the smallest gemstones, to find where they originated. He discovered the first mine where emeralds were found, the green stone. He's made some very important discoveries. To my knowledge, he is not a believer, but he was very interested to study the kinds of stones that are mentioned in the Bible. So he calls me and says, would you do a study with me on the gemstones in the Bible? I will provide the geological study, you study the language, and together we'll work on the archaeology and see what we come up with. I was completely fascinated, what I learned from him and what I learned in the process. Because almost all of the stones in the priestly breastplate have been wrongly translated for the last forever. And the reason is because no one stopped to look at what gemstones actually existed at the time of Moses. And what Dr. Harold did was he went to all the museums in the Middle East and he made records of every kind of gemstone. He looked in archaeological reports and he has a list. So from 2000 to 1200, these are the kind of gemstones. From 1200 to the Greek period, these are the kind of stones. Diamonds did not exist. So if you see the translation diamond in the Bible, ghalat, wrong. If you see the translation rubies, there were no rubies. So it's very interesting. But what we did discover, and I was fascinated by the priest's breastplate. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stones. Here's the Hebrew name. Here are the Egyptian names. 5 of the 7 stones are words of Egyptian origin, or are words we know of stones we know in Egypt. Now again, this might be way too technical, but at least you get the idea. Perhaps the most interesting one is the word nofek. In Hebrew, nofek is from the Egyptian word mefkat. Mefkat is turquoise. There was only one place in the ancient world where turquoise was mined, and that's in Sinai. After 1200 BC, you do not find turquoise again in the Middle East, because the Egyptians stopped mining turquoise at the end of the New Kingdom, and there was no turquoise left. If you go to Sirabit el-Qadam today, you might find little tiny pieces, but nothing is left. When I was there some years ago, I met these Bedouin women, and they were selling us jewelry and silver and all kinds of things. And I saw this beautiful piece of turquoise, and I paid good money and bought it. And I went to Khan al-Khalili to make a chain for my wife. And the man looked at this and laughed. He says, "Where did you get this?" I said, "I got it at Sirabit." He laughed. He said, "This is made in Germany. There's no turquoise in Egypt." Now, this is significant because one of the stones on the priest's breastplate is turquoise. And where does the Bible place the Israelites? In Sinai, the only source of turquoise in the Middle East, and maybe even at or passing by Sirabit el-Qadam. So, in any event, 5 of these stones we can say are Egyptian, and then there are a couple others that are very popular. Odim is the word for carnelian, and this is the word for red. So that's why we're pretty sure Odim is carnelian, because carnelian is a red stone. And the other one, which is very interesting, is sapphire. Sapphire in Hebrew we think is lapis lazuli. And lapis comes from one place in the world, Afghanistan. Even in ancient times, like today, it comes from Afghanistan. So it came thousands of kilometers to get to Egypt. So it was a very valuable stone. Now, when you look at Egyptian jewelry, again going to the jewelry of Tutankhamun, these breastplates are about the same size as the high priest's breastplate, because the Bible tells us it's 1 hand wide. So it's about 1 hand wide. And you can see the colors are turquoise, the red carnelian, and the dark blue for lapis. In this case, most of this is glass, trying to look like the gemstone. Some of it will be real, some of it will be glass. Notice the most popular jewelry during the general period of Moses is these 3 stones: carnelian, turquoise, lapis. All 3 of those are in the priest's breastplate. Now, if we leave Egypt and we go to Byblos, Byblos is today in northern Lebanon, Tripoli. This was a breastplate that was found in one of the kings of Byblos' tomb, and notice the same 3 colors. Orange, red for the carnelian. Here is clear, this is turquoise, and there's some dark blue, which is probably lapis. And notice the Egyptian motif, the Horus falcon, the sun, the wings. So even the motifs, the pictures, as far away as Lebanon, the jewelry has Egyptian style. So all of this, again, suggests that the jewelry of the priest probably had not only Egyptian gemstones, but also maybe the Egyptian technology for making this kind of jewelry that you can see with Tutankhamun. Now, on the right you see the linen underwear of Tutankhamun. The high priests, the priests, not just the high priests, were to wear a special kind of underwear, because in Exodus we're told when the priest climbs on the altar to make offerings, you don't want to expose his private areas under his robe. And so he was to wear a special linen garment. And what's interesting, the Hebrew word for this is mekneseh, and the Egyptian word kenes, at the heart of this, is the sexual area. So it's a linen garment for modesty, to protect the priest. So interesting that something like this is what we have from Tutankhamun's tomb. The word is clearly from Egyptian origin. We have a couple other things associated with the priest's dress. So the priests wear a sash around their waist, and maybe you can see it in these pictures where they wear a sash, tie it, and the string flows down. This is mentioned in Exodus and Leviticus, and the Hebrew word is avnet, which comes from the Egyptian word bened, which means to wrap up. So again, another piece. And then also we have these priests, notice the straps, so these are the Hartumim priests we talked about earlier. They wear a band around their heads. Now notice these priests are wearing wigs now. They have a band around their head. And in Exodus 39, we are told that the priests will wear a turban or a cloth around their head, and the word is pe'ir, Exodus 39:28, and this derives from an Egyptian word pir, meaning a band, or a headband or a cloth. So it's interesting that so much of the priestly attire in Exodus and Leviticus are words from Egypt. So I think this would mean that some of the clothes, some of the things were going to stay the same, while at the other hand, God is saying, I want things to be different. Some things, it doesn't matter. You wear a white galabeya, it's a white galabeya. It doesn't matter. Okay, well. In Numbers chapter 10, God commands Moses to make 2 silver trumpets. And the silver trumpets, we are told, two silver trumpets have two functions. One is to call religious assembly when the people are to come to worship. You blow the trumpet. The other time you blow the trumpet is for military purposes. And they're to be made of silver. Now, many critics of the Bible said this is crazy. Of course, the Hebrews did not know how to make silver trumpets. There weren't such a thing. With the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, two trumpets were found, one made of bronze and one made of silver. And so this is roughly the same time as Moses. Here's a closer look at the silver one, beautiful carving on it. So the point is, in Moses' day, the technology to make silver trumpets existed. This was not some later modern idea. We have it from the exact same period. And we can see Egyptians using the trumpet in the exact two ways that we find it in the Bible. Number one, here is a soldier blowing, and other soldiers come up in a military situation. Here again, we have a military situation. The trumpet is being blown, and the army is coming out to go to war. In this case, to go into Nubia, into Sudan for a battle. And now here we have the trumpet being used in a religious festival. From Luxor Temple, the festival of Opet. Okay, so hopefully what I've suggested for the last little while shows you just how much, especially in the area of religion and priestly clothes, influence. And again, these are not negative things, they're just practical things that were borrowed from ancient Egypt. Now, just a few more things before we break for lunch. I mentioned this yesterday, but to show you here today, that the earliest alphabetic writing in the Semitic script, Canaanite script, is found here in Egypt. It used to be thought that those inscriptions I showed you from Sinai at Serabit el-Qadim were the oldest of this type. Now we have an older example, I think, I'll show you pictures in a moment. But if you look at the oldest alphabetic signs, which you see here on the left, so for instance, the head becomes, because the Semitic word, like Arabic, Ras, Hebrew, Rosh. So the Rosh is the head, becomes the letter R. And of course, you see how it evolves, and finally in Latin and the Hebrew Resh. So you can actually see how these went from Egyptian hieroglyphs through Canaanite, through Phoenician, to Greek, into Latin, and then English. Ayin, the I, Ayin, becomes the letter Ayin, and you can see how it becomes, or M, was from the running water and developed into M. And the hand, Kaf, becomes the K, and so on. So it's very interesting that you can say, really, the idea of the alphabet developed in Egypt, transforming certain hieroglyphic signs into Semitic language, and that this in time influenced the Phoenicians, who gave it probably to the Greeks, then it spread through Europe. So we can thank the early Egyptians, and I've already showed you these pictures from Sinai. Here are some other examples of a Sphinx with these early alphabetic writings on. Now this is the new inscription that was only found in the last 15 years, a place called Wadi al-Khul. If you go from Luxor and you go into the desert towards Libya, it is in this area here they found these inscriptions, and you see the texts along here. These are believed to be maybe 100 to 200 years older than the inscriptions of Sinai. So Wadi al-Khul inscriptions. Here they are. So very similar signs, but older than the Sinai signs. What's so beautiful about the origin of the alphabet from Egypt through the Canaanites, through the Hebrews, is that it made writing Scripture so much easier. If you think about it, the hieroglyphic writing system required hundreds and hundreds of signs. I have heard one estimate that if you wanted to write the Bible in the available hieroglyphic signs, it'd be about 800 signs. Okay? However, here we can now write the Bible with 22 letters. 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. So God in His wisdom had the alphabetic writing system develop so that a few hundred years later, Moses could use it to record the Torah. Now, the other part of this is that we have, and these are all pictures from things found in Jerusalem, these little round pieces of clay were seals on papyrus documents. And we know they were because if you turn them over, you can see the imprint of papyrus on the surface. And you can see the line here is the string, because when you wrote a document, you would roll it up, tie it with string, put a little ball of mud, clay, and press the ring, the seal, onto it. And so that's why you have often on these the name of the scribe, the name of the king. We'll show you more of these later today. There's a good look, the impression of papyrus. So important to realize that when we read in the book of Exodus and elsewhere in the Torah that Moses wrote things down in and the Hebrew word is sefer, sifr in Arabic, sifr, like the chapter. It's the scroll. So for whatever reason, one of the things that Moses and his descendants took with him from Egypt is writing on papyrus and writing with ink. Not writing on clay tablets like the Babylonians, but writing like the Egyptians. And you can see this Egyptian influence in later generations. So here, I'll show you this later today, but this is a seal for such a to seal a document. And the official shown here is the official of the king of Samaria, Hoshea, the last king of Samaria. But look at the Egyptian. You have the scarab, the winged scarab. He looks like an Egyptian. He doesn't look like an Israelite. And I will show you this later today. Believe it or not, this is a seal, and it's about the size of, very small. Very small. This has the name of King Hezekiah. And here's Hezekiah's seal, and he has an Egyptian sun with scarab and an ankh. Here, an ankh here, written with Hebrew. So you can see that the Hebrews took not only the Egyptian writing system, but a lot of the symbolism of Egypt with them. We may come back to this a little bit later on, but recently in Jerusalem, just you see there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock. In this red area, excavations turned up another one of these Hezekiah seals. You see it's a different color, but the same thing, belonging to Hezekiah Hamelech, the king. And here's again is the Ankh sign, the other Ankh is this squeezed here. And interestingly, very near the same area, another seal was named with the name of Isaiah on it. So interesting that since Isaiah and Hezekiah were contemporaries and colleagues, that the seal with their names were found in the same area. All right, very quickly then, much of the Egyptian writing system, although the hieroglyphic system was not used, the writing system was used, writing with papyrus, writing with ink, and much of the terminology that we find associated with writing in the Bible is the Egyptian terminology. So the sons of Shesha in 1 Kings are secretaries, which is from the Egyptian Sesh-Sha'at, document scribes. The word for scroll, the word Megillah, is a scroll, something that's rolled up, is the Hebrew word Medjat, is a scroll rolled up. The word for ink only occurs once in Jeremiah 36, but it's the Egyptian word for ink. So when I think back in the days of Moses, when he left Egypt, he had learned how to write in the court of Pharaoh, learned as a prince growing up, and this was the written tradition that the Israelites took from Egypt all the way down into some of the earliest New Testament books are written on papyrus. So Egypt made a very important imprint on not only the Bible, the Old Testament, but even into the New Testament when we think of how the Bible was recorded, how the Bible was preserved, how the Bible was transmitted for generations to come.